Hello students, welcome to the academia. Today I will discuss an important metabolic disease, that is diabetes mellitus. So it is a very well known disease, diabetes mellitus, and many of you have known this. So what is diabetes mellitus? So it is a group of metabolic diseases. In which there are high blood sugar levels over a prolonged period. So this thing is very important. So generally we know that after eating something, that is after breakfast or after lunch or dinner, 1 or 2 hours later the blood sugar level is increased, but after a certain time that sugar comes to the normal level. Why? Due to a particular hormone, insulin effect. The insulin is a pancreatic hormone which regulate the blood sugar level, that means which convert the glucose into glycogen, and these glycogen stored in our muscles, in our liver and other tissues of our body. But when there is a high blood sugar level which persists for the prolonged period, and the sugar level not after taking some food but also persistent sugar level, even the fasting sugar level is also increased for a prolonged time, it means there is diabetes mellitus. So what are the symptoms of the high blood sugar level? Like frequent urination is one of the most important symptom, increased thirst and increased hunger. And if this kind of situation is left untreated, diabetes can cause many other complications. Now, what is the cause of diabetes? The diabetes is due to either the pancreas not producing enough insulin. We know that the insulin which is released from the endocrine pancreas, where the beta cells produce insulin. Insulin itself is a polypeptide hormone, and it helps in the conversion of glycogen from glucose. In any reason, if the cells of the body also not responding properly to the insulin which is produced, then also the diabetes mellitus occur. There are 3 main types of diabetes mellitus. Number 1, so type 1 diabetes mellitus, type 2 diabetes mellitus and gestational diabetes. So next we move to these types, that what happens in the type 1, type 2 and gestational diabetes. Actually, in the type 1 diabetes mellitus, it results from the pancreas failure to produce enough insulin. This form was referred to as insulin dependent diabetes mellitus or juvenile diabetes. So the type 1 diabetes mellitus is also known as insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. So it is also known as IDDM, that is insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, and it is also known as juvenile diabetes. The another name is juvenile diabetes. So in this diabetes, the pancreas cannot produce enough amount of insulin due to the problem in the cells of the pancreas or due to the aging process. In the type 2 diabetes, it begins with the insulin resistance, a condition in which the cells fail to respond to insulin properly. Generally, this thing you should know, that any hormone, they act on their target organ, and when the hormone act, they will bound to some of the receptor present on the cell surface. So the particular receptor binds with the particular hormone, and this is called the specificity of the hormone. So in case of type 2 diabetes mellitus, the cells actually fail to respond to the insulin properly, and it may be due to the receptors which are malformed, so that the insulin cannot bind with the receptors of the cell. This form was referred as non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus or NEET. It is also known as adult onset diabetes. The primary cause is excessive body weight if you have, or not enough exercise if you do, then it may cause the NIDDM, that is non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. Here the receptors may be not working, and so that due to the presence of insulin, the insulin cannot work properly. And next one, the gestational diabetes. So it is the third main form, and it occurs actually in the pregnant woman without a previous history of diabetes. So this gestational diabetes is actually occur in pregnant women. Those who don't have any previous history of diabetes. So these are the major three types of the diabetes. If we compare the types, then we can say that the type 1 and type 2, mostly the type 1 occur in children and the type 2 occur in the adults, and that's why the type 1 is called juvenile diabetes and the type 2 is called adult onset diabetes. So this is the major difference. Next, the body size in case of type 1 is thin or normal, whereas in type 2 diabetes often the body weight is too much, that is maybe obese. The prevalence of the type 1 diabetes is approximately 10%, whereas the type 2 diabetes is of 90%. Next, we move to the sign and symptoms elaborately of the diabetes mellitus. Okay, so previously also I discussed about the symptoms. So the classic symptoms are weight loss, then polyuria. What is polyuria? That is increased urination. Then polydipsia, that is increased thirst. And polyphagia, that is increased hunger. So the symptoms may develop rapidly in type 1 diabetes, while they usually develop much more slowly and may be absent in type 2 diabetes. So it is a thing which is taken to be consideration. In addition, also other symptoms like blurry vision, then headache, fatigue, slow healing of cuts, itchy skin. So these are also included. Prolonged high blood sugar can cause glucose absorption in the lens of the eye, and which leads to the changes in its shape, resulting in vision changes. So why sometimes the vision change or blurry vision occur due to this kind of regulation of the glucose. A number of skin rashes also occur in diabetes, and these are collectively known as diabetic dermatodromes. So all forms of diabetes increase the risk of long-term complication, and these typically develop after many years. And the major long-term complications are the blood vessel damage. Diabetes doubles the risk of cardiovascular disease. About 75% deaths in diabetes are due to the coronary artery disease, and other macrovascular diseases like stroke and peripheral vascular diseases also occur. So we should not ignore the diabetes mellitus, though the symptoms sometimes for the type 2 diabetes these they are not readily occur, so we should be very much careful. The primary complications like the damage of the small blood vessels, damage to the eyes, kidneys and nerves, and one more important thing which is very common, that is diabetic retinopathy. So a variety of related complications are actually very much damaging to our body, and ultimately it causes to the death if proper precautions are not taken. Next, moving to the pathophysiology of the diabetes. So in the pathophysiology, what we have seen, so previously I have told that insulin is the principal hormone that regulates the uptake of glucose from the blood into the cells of the body, especially liver, adipose tissue and the muscle. Except the smooth muscles, the body obtains glucose from three main places. That is the intestinal absorption of food. Generally we know that after eating the food become digested and then absorbed, and after the absorption the glucose comes to the blood. Next one, the breakdown of glycogen. If the storage glycogen which break down, then it releases the glucose in the blood. And another is gluconeogenesis, that is the generation of glucose from the non-carbohydrate substrates in the body. So insulin plays a critical role in balancing glucose level in the body. So insulin is most important thing It can inhibit the breakdown of glycogen or the process of gluconeogenesis. It can stimulate the transport of glucose into the fat or muscle cells. It can stimulate the storage of glucose. So, insulin actually released from the beta cells of islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. And in response to the rising level of blood sugar, it actually stimulated, its secretion is stimulated. Lower glucose level result in decreased insulin release from the beta cell and results in the breakdown of the glycogen to glucose. So in the pathophysiology, what we have seen that if the amount of insulin available is insufficient, so that the insulin cannot work. If the cells respond poorly to the insulin, if insulin itself is defective, so which leads to the glucose will not be absorbed properly by the cells. So the glucose remain in the bloods, and due to that the net effect is persistently high level of blood glucose, poor protein synthesis, breakdown of fat storage also, and it leads to this condition, that is when the glucose concentration in the blood remains high all the time, and the kidneys will reach a threshold of reabsorption which is called glucosuria, and this increases the osmotic pressure of the urine, that is polyuria. And this polyuria, that is loss of fluid from the body, and this decreases blood volume, and it will be replaced osmotically from the water held in the body cells, and it causes the dehydration and polydipsia. So these are the classical symptoms of the diabetes mellitus. And the type 1 diabetes is partly inherited with multiple genes, including certain HLA genotypes, and it actually influences the risk of the diabetes. In genetically susceptible people, the onset of diabetes can be triggered by one or more environmental factors such as viral infection or diet, etc. Among dietary factors, the gluten may lead to the type 1 diabetes. But the mechanism is not fully understood till now. And in case of the type 2 diabetes mellitus is characterized by insulin resistance. So basically its prevalence is maximum, and the defective responsiveness of the body tissues to the insulin is believed to involve the insulin receptor, which I have told earlier. And in the early stage of type 2, the predominant abnormality is reduced insulin sensitivity. Type 2 diabetes mellitus is due primarily to lifestyle factors, and these leads to this kind of disorders. So in today's video about diabetes mellitus, we have discussed about the types, the signs and symptoms, the causes and the pathophysiology of the diabetes mellitus. In our next discussion, we will give elaborate stress on the gestational diabetes, which is occur in the pregnant women. So about the pathophysiology of the gestational diabetes and their causes and what are the complications they face. So hope you students can understand these discussion today. If you have any query and question, you can ask or can comment in the comment box. Thank you so much.